When Trump tried to humiliate Barack Obama on live television, no one expected what happened next. One sentence from Obama silenced the entire room, and it changed how people saw leadership overnight. It happened in less than 10 seconds. A flicker of tension, so sharp it could cut the air. Cameras were already rolling, lights blazing across the stage at the Washington Convention Center, where the bipartisan economic summit had drawn an audience of world leaders, CEOs, and journalists from every major outlet. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive perfume, the kind that lingers in high-profile rooms where reputation and pride sit side by side. President Donald Trump leaned forward in his chair, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He glanced sideways at Barack Obama, who sat 3 seats away, pen in hand, listening quietly to a moderator's question about trade recovery after the pandemic. Then Trump's voice sliced through the decorum like a knife. Barack, if your trade deals were so great, why did we spend years fixing your mess? The crowd shifted instantly, a few gasps, some muffled chuckles, a rustle of surprise from the journalist pressed against the back wall. The moderator tried to regain control, but the damage was done. The president had made it personal. Obama didn't rush to respond. He glanced at Trump with the faintest expression of disbelief, as if deciding whether to dignify the interruption at all. His hand adjusted the papers before him, a slow, deliberate motion, while Trump watched him, almost daring him to react. When Obama finally spoke, his voice carried none of the heat in room. It was steady, even gentle. "You know, Donald," he said, "facts don't usually mind who's president. They just show up no matter what we believe." Laughter rippled across the audience, light but nervous. Trump smirked and leaned back, muttering something about fake numbers into the mic. The moderator tried again to steer the conversation back to global supply chains, but the moment had already drawn blood. Cameras zoomed in, catching the tightening expressions of the aides sitting behind each man across the hall. A row of international delegates from Germany and South Korea exchanged quick looks, whispering translations. Journalists' fingers clattered against their laptops. One of them, a young correspondent from Reuters, would later tweet, "Obama's calm is cutting deeper than Trump's insults." But what really froze the room wasn't Obama's calm. It was what came next when Trump interrupted, again louder, this time accusing Obama of being weak on China. Obama raised his hand slightly, signaling to the moderator that he'd like to answer the room. Quieted at once, weakness, he began, is not about who yells the loudest. It's about who plans the farthest. He leaned forward, eyes steady. We had disagreements with Beijing. Yes, but we also built frameworks that prevented trade wars and stabilized currencies. Preparation isn't weakness, it's leadership. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, only silence, a silence that said people were processing what they just heard. Trump shifted in his chair. Clearly irritated. Sounds nice, but it didn't work, did it? He shot back. Obama's gaze didn't move. He let the question hang in the air, then spoke in a tone so measured it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. The difference between leading and reacting, he said, is preparation for a heartbeat. The space between them seemed to stretch. Even the camera operators stopped adjusting their lenses. The moderator cleared his throat, grateful for the pause. "Gentlemen, let's continue with..." But no one was listening. Everyone was staring at Obama, who had just taken back control of the room, without raising his voice, sitting in the third row. A senator from Arizona whispered to the colleague beside him, "That's going viral by midnight." He was right. But before the social media storm, before the headlines and think pieces, there was that moment, the kind that imprints itself in people's memory like a still frame. Trump's expression hardening, Obama's calm, unshaken, the audience caught between discomfort and awe. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about composure under fire. And while the cameras kept rolling, Obama's silence spoke louder than Trump's bluster. He looked down at his notes again, unbothered, then turned back to the moderator. "We can continue," he said simply. That line, almost casual, was the final punctuation to a power move that didn't need volume or force, just poise. A few people clapped hesitantly. At first, then more joined in, though Trump's tight smile stayed frozen. One aide later described it perfectly. The room didn't erupt, it exhaled, but the real story wasn't over. Because what happened after that moment would spread far beyond that hall. reaching every corner of the internet. Within hours, the applause faded, but the tension stayed. Every camera in the hall stayed fixed on the two men. You could almost sense the reporters holding their breath, waiting for the next spark. President Trump wasn't about to let Obama have the last word, not on live television, not in front of the world. He leaned toward the microphone, that trademark grin curling across his face. "You talk a lot about preparation, Barack," he said, his voice echoing across the room. "But last I checked, all that preparation gave us the slowest recovery in history. People were hurting. Businesses were closing. We fixed that. We made America strong again." Obama tilted his head slightly, a faint smile forming strong, for who he asked. His tone wasn't sarcastic. It was surgical calm, precise, because I remember farmers struggling when those tariffs hit. I remember automakers in Michigan begging for stability. That's not strength, Donald, that's reaction. Trump blinked, then laughed into the mic. "You know, that's cute, real cute. You had 8 years to do something and you did nothing. You just talked all speeches, no results." The audience shifted again, a few murmurs, some heads turning. One of the camera operators could feel his palms sweating. This was no longer about policy, it was pride versus composure. Obama leaned forward now, his elbows on the table. "Well, I think the record speaks for itself," he said, his voice even. 75 straight months of job growth, the auto industry alive, bin Laden no longer an issue. There was a faint ripple of laughter from the back of the hall. Even some in Trump's corner tried not to smile. Trump cut him off again. "And yet people voted for me, didn't they? They wanted change. They wanted someone who'd actually fight." Obama didn't look away. "Fighting's easy," he said quietly. "Building something that lasts, that's the hard part." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. That single line seemed to hang above the stage like smoke. The moderator looked uncomfortable now, hands folded tightly. He tried to regain balance. "Gentlemen, perhaps we can." But the conversation had slipped out of his hands completely. Trump jabbed a finger toward Obama. "You had 8 years to fix trade with China, to deal with NATO, to get the border under control, and you failed big time. I came in, and in 2 years we had record numbers." Obama didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of water, waited for the noise to fade, and then said, "Leadership isn't measured by volume or self-congratulation. It's measured by what happens when no one's looking. The quiet decisions that prevent crises instead of creating them." That line hit like a wave, no shouting. No insults, just calm dissection. Trump's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the table again from the audience. A political reporter from the Washington Post whispered to her cameraman, "He's baiting him without even trying behind the scenes." White House aides exchanged uneasy glances. They could see Trump's irritation boiling every time Obama spoke. The audience leaned forward every time Trump spoke. It leaned back, and then it happened again. Trump interrupted mid-sentence. "You talk like everything was perfect under you. It wasn't. People lost faith in this country. They lost faith in their leaders." Obama nodded. "Once they did," he said softly. "And the way to rebuild that faith isn't by dividing them further." The moderator seized the pause. "Let's move to the question of post-pandemic economic cooperation." But Trump waved him off. "No, I want to finish this because I'm tired of hearing about how everything was supposedly perfect before me." Obama's expression didn't change. He didn't look angry, if anything. He looked disappointed, the kind of look a teacher gives when a student keeps missing the point, Donald. He said, "Finally, it's not about perfect. It's about progress. Leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most prepared when things go wrong." A short pause, then, almost under his breath, he added, "And things have gone very wrong." You could almost feel the temperature drop. The audience froze again. A reporter's camera clicked once. That single photo would later appear on dozens of headlines. The next morning, Trump leaned back, visibly irritated now. "Oh, give me a break," he muttered, but his microphone picked it up. Obama didn't look at him again. He turned back to the moderator and said, "You wanted to talk about recovery. Let's talk about results, not rhetoric." The moderator, relieved to have the reins again, cleared his throat and shifted the discussion. But everyone in that room, from the aides in the front row to the journalist at the back, knew this wasn't over. One international guest, a diplomat from Japan, leaned over to his colleague and whispered in halting English, "Obama wins by calm." His colleague nodded. "Trump fights shadows. It was the perfect summary of what everyone was watching, play out a political chess match between volume and discipline. But this exchange was only the surface. What happened behind the curtains, once the microphones were off, would reveal even more about how both men handled the fallout when the summit broke for a short recess. The air in the hall was charged like static before a storm journalists rushed to send clips to their networks. Phones lit up with headlines forming in real time. Obama's line, "The difference between leading and reacting is preparation," was already echoing across social media, catching fire faster than anyone could have expected. Backstage, Trump's aides huddled in a tight circle near the service corridor. Their whispers carried a nervous edge. One of them, a communications advisor named Brian Keene, rubbed his temples. "He's trending already," he muttered, scrolling through his phone. Hashtag prepared leader. It's all over Twitter. Trump's press secretary leaned closer. "We'll handle it. Just get him refocused for the next panel." But Trump wasn't interested in refocusing. He was pacing his tie, slightly loosened his tone. Sharp, they love him no matter what he says. He could read a shopping list, and they'd call it wisdom. He gestured toward the hallway. "You saw it. I had him cornered, and still, they treat him like a saint." Keene hesitated. "Sir, he didn't really respond the way you expected. That's why it hit harder." Trump stopped pacing his face. Hardening, he got lucky with one line. He said, "We'll see how he does." When the next question hits on the other side of the hall, Obama sat with his former aide Marcus Bell. The contrast couldn't have been sharper where Trump's room buzzed with agitation. Obama's was quiet, almost still. "Marcus poured coffee into a paper cup you got under his skin," he said quietly. Obama smiled faintly. "That's not the goal, but when someone mistakes noise for strength, all you need to do is let silence make its point." Marcus nodded. "You think he'll come at you again?" Obama glanced toward the door leading back to the stage. "Oh, I'm counting on it." When the panel resumed, both men returned to their seats and the crowd leaned forward. You could sense it. Everyone expected. Round two, the moderator cleared his throat. "We'll continue with the discussion on post-pandemic global cooperation. President Trump, former President Obama. Thank you for remaining with us." Trump's grin had returned, but it was forced. He jumped in before the first question was even finished. "Cooperation's good, sure, but not when we're the only ones paying. I told the Europeans to step up, and guess what? They didn't. So I cut funding. That's leadership. That's putting America first." Obama waited for the applause that never came. Then he leaned into the mic. "It's true. Leadership means protecting your country, but it also means knowing when cooperation is an investment, not a handout." Trump frowned. "Investment. We lost billions to freeloaders." Obama's tone didn't change. "We lost trust when we walked away from allies who depended on our steadiness. Once that's gone, money can't buy it back." There was a long pause. The audience stayed silent. The moderator tried to keep things civil. "Let's focus on solutions, Mr. Obama. What would your approach be today?" Obama didn't hesitate. "I'd start with truth." He said, "We can't fix a problem. We refuse to see facts are stubborn. They'll outlast politics." Every time Trump smirked. "That sounds great in a classroom, Barack, but this is the real world." Obama smiled, and for the first time there was a flicker of warmth, not amusement, but pity. "You're right," he said. "It is the real world. That's why words matter." Trump turned toward him sharply. "You know, people are tired of your smooth talk. They want results." Obama didn't look away. "Then they should demand results grounded in reality, not resentment." A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Wow." Trump shifted in his chair, visibly irritated. "You keep pretending like your way worked. It didn't. The world was laughing at us." Obama looked at him steadily, "And yet the world's watching us now, wondering when we'll start acting like leaders again." The moderator stepped in quickly. Let's pause there," he said nervously. But it was too late. The blow had landed even through the glare of the stage lights. You could see the frustration in Trump's eyes. He turned away from Obama, staring down at his notes as the crowd murmured softly. Obama, meanwhile, sat still, composed, breathing evenly as though the air itself had slowed to match his rhythm. A few rows back, a foreign journalist whispered, "He's dismantling him," without raising his voice. Another replied, "That's power, quiet power." By the end of the segment, Even the moderator seemed unsure how to proceed. The energy in the room had changed calmer, yet sharper, as though everyone had collectively realized that the balance of control had shifted as the session wrapped up. The two men shook hands briefly, cameras flashed, catching the strained moment in perfect clarity. Obama's smile looked genuine. Trump's did not. As they stepped off stage, one reporter shouted, "Mr. Obama, any comment on your exchange with the president?" Obama didn't stop walking. He simply turned his head slightly and said, "Preparation doesn't end." When the cameras turn off, the line would replay endlessly across networks that night. But what truly cemented the moment wasn't what happened on stage. It was what came next, behind the scenes, where the pressure boiled in private and the reaction spoke louder than any debate ever could. When the doors closed behind the last group of attendees, the summit's main hall emptied into murmurs and clicking heels outside. Clusters of reporters huddled around glowing screens, uploading footage and composing headlines inside. The two former presidents moved in opposite directions, one toward a press conference, the other toward a quiet lounge lined with polished mahogany and half-empty coffee cups. Trump's staff followed him like a moving storm. His communications director was the first to speak. "Mr. President, we can still control the narrative. We'll release a clip emphasizing your economic record." "Forget the clips," Trump snapped. He tore open a bottle of water, took a sip, and slammed it down on the table. "You saw what he did. The guy sits there with that smug look, and the media eats it up. They're not talking about trade. They're talking about his calm. Calm doesn't fix inflation." His chief of staff, Randall Green, spoke carefully. "Sir, people like, contrast your fire. He's ice. It's what sells Trump. Turn to him. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm running a country." Randall didn't respond. He just nodded and checked his phone, where notifications were piling up like falling dominoes. Obama's clip was everywhere. CNN, Reuters, BBC, even Fox. The line was already being quoted in headlines. "The difference between leading and reacting is preparation." Trump's face reddened. "Preparation," he muttered. "Give me a break." He had 8 years to prepare. Across the hall, Obama sat in a small meeting room with 2 aides and a cup of green tea that had long gone cold. The lights were dim, the mood calm. Through the glass wall, the city glowed beyond Washington at dusk. Cranes and monuments outlined against the fading blue. Marcus Bell leaned forward, scrolling through his tablet. "You're trending on every platform: Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. Even kids are remixing that line. Somebody turned it into a song already." Obama gave a soft laugh. "I suppose that's one way to reach the next generation." His communications advisor, Tessa Cole, smiled. "It's not just trending, it's shifting tone. Commentators are calling it the most composed public moment of the year." Obama didn't look satisfied, just thoughtful. "That's flattering, but the message matters more than the moment. People are desperate for examples of steadiness. Something that feels grounded." He set down his cup. "That's what leadership should look like, not shouting matches." Marcus tilted his head. "He's not going to take that quietly." "No," Obama replied. "He'll respond probably by morning." "But that's fine. Some lessons take time to land." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. A staffer peeked in. "Sister, the press is asking if you'll make a statement tonight." Obama shook his head. "No need, the statement's already been made." Meanwhile, down the hall, Trump's team gathered for damage control screens, flickered with cable news panels, each dissecting the confrontation like a prize fight. On one screen, a conservative commentator defended Trump. "He's a fighter, people like that." Obama's all words on another, a former diplomat, countered, "Words can move. Markets composure, builds trust." What you saw today was experience versus ego. Trump grabbed the remote and turned off the screens. "They'll turn on anyone," he muttered. "I've done more for this country than he ever did." Randall stepped closer. "Sir, tomorrow's interviews are already lined up. We can shape the follow-up." Trump looked toward the door, his reflection catching in the glass. "No," he said after a moment. "We're doing it my way. I'll address it live tonight back in the lounge." Obama's team was preparing to leave when Tessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. "He's going live on cable in 30 minutes, says he's responding to false narratives." Obama didn't seem surprised. "Let him. Sometimes silence is the loudest reply." Outside cameras were already being set up on the South Lawn. their lights cutting through the early evening air. The press gathered, quickly drawn by the promise of spectacle. When Trump finally appeared at the podium, he spoke with controlled aggression. "I know the media wants to talk about quotes and calm voices," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "But let's talk about action. We brought jobs back. We rebuilt our economy. We stood up to China. Leadership isn't about preparation. It's about results, and we have results." He went on for 20 minutes defending his record, taking jabs at Obama's elitist tone, and repeating phrases that played well with his base. But even as he spoke, a strange thing happened. The more he talked, the less it seemed to matter across the country. Viewers watching from their living rooms could sense the difference. One man in Omaha turned to his wife and said quietly, "It's like he's arguing with the echo of someone who already won." By the time the speech ended, news outlets had already started comparing sound bites. Obama's brief calm statement against Trump's full-throated rebuttal, the contrast was striking inside his car. Obama watched a short replay on his phone, the screen's glow reflecting. Off his face, he said nothing for a while, then softly, "It's not about winning moments, it's about setting examples." Marcus, seated beside him, nodded, "And right now you just did both." Obama smiled faintly. "Let's hope people notice." He slipped his phone back into his pocket, and the car merged into the DC traffic tail lights, stretching like a slow-moving river. But by dawn, it wouldn't just be people noticing. The media storm brewing overnight was about to turn that quiet composure into a national conversation by sunrise. The summit had become a digital wildfire. News networks ran split-screen coverage. Obama's composed exchange on one side, Trump's fiery rebuttal on the other. The captions varied by network, but the tone was universal. A clash of leadership styles, cable anchors dissected every pause, every glance, every word on one morning show. The host asked, "Did Obama just redefine the tone of American leadership again?" Another replied, "He didn't even try." That's what makes it sting. Clips flooded social media overnight. Hashtags like hashtag prepared leader and hashtag leading. Not reacting dominated trending lists on YouTube. Compilations of Obama's calm response racked up millions of views set to dramatic piano music and slow-motion edits. One video simply looped the line. "The difference between leading and reacting is preparation over crowd applause." Trump's team scrambled to counter it. His communication advisor, Randall Green, appeared on several networks defending the president. "This isn't about tone, it's about action. The president's results speak louder than rehearsed speeches," he said firmly. But the message wasn't landing. Viewers could tell it wasn't about policy anymore. It was about perception. That morning, the Washington Post published an editorial titled "The Power of Stillness," describing Obama's demeanor as a reminder that restraint is not weakness, but mastery. Even the Wall Street Journal, typically more conservative, admitted the exchange showed two definitions of leadership colliding in real time at a diner in Kansas City. A group of regulars sat watching the coverage between bites of pancakes. An older man in a baseball cap said, "You might not like Obama, but that guy's got control." A younger woman across the counter replied, "Yeah, but Trump's not wrong about the economy." The cook wiped his hands on his apron and said quietly, "Control is the economy you can't build if you're always breaking something." That sentiment, small, unscripted, ordinary, was spreading faster than any talking point. Later that afternoon in a Manhattan newsroom, producers debated whether to lead the evening segment with Obama's quote again or move on to Trump's planned follow-up rally. One of them sighed, "We'd love to pivot, but this clip's not dying, it's dominating." Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, frustration was simmering. Trump's social media manager handed him a print out of online engagement charts they're running with the phrase, he said, "It's everywhere." Trump skimmed the paper and threw it onto the desk. "Let them talk. They'll get tired of it." But even as he said it, his tone betrayed irritation. His press secretary, Meredith Pike, spoke carefully. "Sir, we could use this. Maybe release a statement that reframes your message, something like results don't need preparation, they need action." Trump gave a half smile, "Good line. Put my name on it within an hour." The statement went live, but online it didn't resonate. Instead, people compared it to Obama's earlier remark, quoting both side-by-side comment sections filled with sentences like, "One sounds like leadership, The other sounds like reaction at the same time. Obama was in Chicago for a scheduled appearance at a youth leadership forum. The event wasn't meant to address politics, but everyone in the audience was thinking about the summit when a student finally asked, "How do you stay calm when people come at you publicly?" Obama smiled. Well, he said, if you lose your cool every time someone challenges you, you hand them your control, and once you do that, they decide the story, not you. The audience applauded, but his tone wasn't performative. He wasn't gloating. He was teaching. That clip, barely a minute long, went viral again. The contrast deepened. The image of Obama as composed and steady versus Trump as fiery and defensive was now fixed in the public's mind. Political analysts began calling it a defining moment in modern statesmanship. One commentator on PBS said, Obama reminded people what grace under pressure looks like in an era of noise that felt revolutionary, but not everyone saw it as a win for Obama. Some conservative pundits accuse the media of bias. They glorify him no matter what one anchor said. If Michelle leaned back, well, you reminded them across the country. Trump sat in the Oval Office watching a replay of the same coverage. The expression on his face was unreadable for a long moment. He said nothing. Then he turned to Randall. They're calling it composure. I call it PR. Randall hesitated. Sir, the polls are shifting slightly. People are saying you seemed angry. Trump turned off the TV. Maybe anger's what they need to wake up. He looked toward the window, the reflection of the White House glowing against the night. But even he knew something about that moment had slipped from his grasp. But while the media framed it as a rivalry, what came next would show something deeper, how each man carried that moment privately. Long after the lights went off by the next evening, the frenzy had slowed but not faded. The headlines were quieter, the commentary less frenzied, yet the conversation had shifted. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It had turned into a discussion about leadership temperament and what it means to hold power without losing yourself to it. In Washington, Trump sat alone in the Oval Office, the hum of air conditioning filling the silence. He had turned off the television hours ago. The summit replay was still running on a tablet nearby, muted, frozen on a frame of Obama-speaking eyes. Steady expression, calm. He stared at it for a long time, then muttered under his breath, "Calm doesn't win elections." The truth was, he wasn't angry. Not entirely. It was something closer to frustration. The kind that comes when control begins to slip. He knew media perception was its own kind of battlefield, one that couldn't be won with force. Still, he couldn't stand the idea that people were talking about composure instead of results. He picked up his phone and scrolled through headlines. Every outlet was running variations of the same story. Obama's quiet masterclass, grace over aggression, when stillness speaks louder. Trump dropped the phone onto the desk. Grace doesn't build walls, he said softly to himself. Grace doesn't get votes, a knock on the door. Interrupted his thoughts. Randall Green entered cautiously, holding a folder. Sir, here's the overnight briefing. Polls are reacting to the summit. Mostly neutral, but the tone online favors Obama. Trump didn't look up, favors him. How people are saying he looked presidential. Randall replied, steady, confident. Trump chuckled, though it didn't sound amused. Presidential, he's not the president, I am. Randall nodded, unsure if he should say more. Yes, sir, but maybe that's why it hit harder. Trump waved him off. That's enough, Randall. As Randall left the room, fell silent again. Trump leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. Somewhere deep down, he knew perception could rewrite history faster than any policy ever could. But he also knew something else. Pride doesn't yield easily across the country. Obama was sitting in his Chicago home office, surrounded by books and soft lamplight. Outside, Lake Michigan shimmered faintly through the window. The day had been long: interviews, meetings, a quiet dinner with Michelle. But his mind was still running. Marcus Bell joined him, laptop in hand. They're still replaying the summit. Late night hosts are quoting you again. Obama sighed, half amused. That's what happens when words get taken out of context. I wasn't trying to go viral. Marcus smiled. Maybe not, but it worked. Obama leaned back, eyes distant. You know, people think composure is natural. It's not. It's practiced. It's the result of learning not to react to every punch. He paused, then added, when I was younger, I used to think anger could move mountains, but all it does is move dust. Marcus closed the laptop. You think he got the message? Obama smiled faintly. Maybe, but this isn't about him. It's about reminding people that power means nothing without perspective. They sat in silence for a moment. The clock ticked softly. Then Obama stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the quiet skyline. The country's tired. He said, tired of shouting, tired of noise. Maybe that's why that line hit home. Not because it was clever, but because it was calm. Marcus nodded. Sometimes. Calm feels like courage. Obama turned back smiling. Exactly. He picked up his phone, scrolling briefly through the news. He stopped at a photo from the summit, him and Trump mid-confrontation, the contrast clear. Even in still form, one angry, one unshaken. The caption read, "The moment the room chose silence." Obama read it twice, then put the phone down. "History doesn't always choose who's loudest," he said quietly. "It chooses who leaves people," thinking Michelle entered the room a few minutes later, barefoot, wearing a simple sweater. "You're still working." "Not really," he said, just reflecting. She smiled knowingly. "You've been doing that your whole life." He laughed softly, "And I still haven't gotten it perfect." She crossed her arms. "Nobody does. That's the point." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Do you ever think people mistake noise for power all the time?" she said. "But you can't out-yell history. You can only outlast it." That line stayed with him. Outside, the wind from the lake brushed against the glass. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried weight for the first time since the summit. Obama felt the noise of the world dim enough to think clearly. He knew tomorrow would bring new headlines, new debates, new provocations, but none of that mattered tonight. Leadership, he thought, wasn't about domination. It was about endurance. The kind that didn't need applause to stand tall. He turned off the lamp, leaving the room in soft darkness. Michelle lingered by the doorway, watching him for a moment before whispering, "Get some rest. You've already said enough." But while Obama rested easy, the storm he left behind was still growing, and soon the lesson hidden within his calm would ripple far beyond politics, reaching people who'd never cared about leadership until now. By the end of the week, the summit had evolved from a headline into a defining cultural moment. Every major outlet had run its analysis, and every social feed had turned Obama's quiet exchange into a living symbol, one that people were interpreting through their own lenses. It wasn't just about two men anymore. It was about two versions of leadership at a cafe in Indianapolis. A group of college students sat around a laptop replaying the clip for the fifth time. One of them, a political science major named Reggie, leaned forward. "You see that he didn't even raise his voice. That's power." Across the room, a retired veteran watching from another table muttered back, "In my day, leadership meant composure. Now it's all sound bites." That was the pattern repeating everywhere. Living rooms, classrooms, diners, even workplaces, the conversation had shifted from politics to personality, from party lines to principles. People weren't just talking about Obama's words. They were thinking about how they reacted under pressure themselves. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump's team had regrouped. His advisors urged him to move on, to focus on the upcoming infrastructure announcement. But he couldn't shake the sense that something intangible had slipped away. Not his authority, but the narrative. For years, he'd mastered the art of dominating attention. Yet now silence had beaten him at his own game in a private moment with Randall. Trump admitted, "He didn't beat me on facts, he beat me on timing." That pause. That's what people remember. Randall, hesitant, replied, "Sometimes what you don't say hits harder than what you do." Trump stared at him for a long second before replying, "Yeah, well, that's not how I built this movement." He glanced at the muted TV in the corner, where Obama's face flashed again. Another interview clip. "People love control. I give them energy." Randall shifted uncomfortably. "Energy's good, sir, but too much of it can burn the room." Trump didn't answer. He just turned away. His reflection fractured across the glass window. Behind his desk, that same night, Obama was back in Chicago addressing a group of community leaders. It wasn't a televised event, just a small gathering in a local civic hall, the kind of place where folding chairs creaked and microphones hummed faintly before speeches. He stood at the podium, speaking plainly. "I know some of you saw the summit this week, and I'll be honest, I didn't plan to make headlines, but I think what people responded to wasn't me. It was what they miss. They miss steadiness. They miss seeing disagreement without destruction. A woman in the audience, a small business owner, raised her hand. How do you stay calm when you're being provoked in front of the world? Obama smiled gently. I've learned that anger is like gasoline. It can start a fire or it can keep you moving, but you have to decide which one it's going to be. The room stayed silent for a beat before applause filled it warm and genuine. Later that evening, as he packed his notes, Marcus approached him. You realize this isn't just about politics anymore, right? You're starting something bigger, a reminder of what real leadership feels like. Obama shook his head. It's not about starting something. It's about reminding people we're capable of more than shouting matches. Because when we lose patience, we lose progress. Outside, a cold wind swept across the street, carrying distant city sounds. A few college students waiting near the door recognized him and waved shyly. He smiled and waved back. One of them called out, "Hey, Mr. Obama, preparation, right?" He laughed always by the next morning. That simple interaction was trending. Again, just a short clip taken on someone's phone. It didn't feature speeches or debates, just a laugh, a wave, and a quiet reminder that calm could be contagious. Even some of Trump's critics began to acknowledge that something in the national tone was changing. The chaos, fatigue was real. People were tired of anger being the only currency in conversation. They were starting to crave something steadier on Sunday morning. A pastor in Dallas quoted Obama's line during a sermon. The difference between leading and reacting is preparation. He paused and added that applies to all of us, not just presidents in our homes, our jobs, our friendships. Leadership starts with restraint. That message spread faster than any campaign slogan could have. By the following week, even international newspapers had picked up on it. The Guardian called it the return of reflective leadership. The Times described it as the moment calm reclaimed its dignity, and through it all, Obama stayed quiet. No new statements, no interviews, just silence. And somehow that silence carried weight for Trump. The days following felt heavy. He continued with official duties, press briefings and rallies, but something had shifted in how people looked at him. The fire still drew crowds, but the spark no longer felt new. Every shout, every interruption now seemed louder against the echo of Obama's calm, and perhaps deep down, he knew that single sentence had done what thousands of speeches could not. It had exposed the power of composure. Weeks later, during a private dinner in D.C., a reporter asked Obama if he thought the summit changed anything. He smiled, took a sip of water, and replied, "Change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from listening long enough for silence to teach you something." The reporter didn't interrupt, she just nodded, realizing she'd heard her headline already. As the conversation faded and the lights dimmed. Obama rose from his seat and walked toward the exit, his calm presence leaving behind something the room hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet confidence, because in the end, true leadership isn't about overpowering others, it's about mastering yourself. And for everyone watching that week, from students to CEOs, from veterans to parents, that lesson lingered long after the cameras turned off. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on your own kind of leadership. Stay steady, stay thoughtful, and remember, preparation will always speak louder than reaction. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what real strength looks like.